All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching online. I'm Dave Summers, Executive Director of the Omaha Bar Association. We are very excited today to have a 1-hour CLE on Lawyers Without Borders. For those people that are in person, we're at the Field Club of Omaha. We have people actually from around the country online, and we appreciate you joining us. I want to thank Tom Dalk and QTech Rock for sponsoring this event. Really do appreciate that. And that's my short intro. I'm going to turn over to Robin. She's executive director of Lawyers Without Borders. If you have any trouble hearing online, please let me know. I'm here to troubleshoot, and we'll make sure this works. So turn over. There you go.
To everybody, good afternoon to everybody online. We have an amazing turnout. I will say it's really exciting to actually have traveled and to be here. And thank you for the really warm hospitality. And thank you, Tom, and thank you, Dave, for having the just making this event happen and all the work that you put into it. So thanks. I thought since we're a relatively small group, I would sort of sit back here and maybe we could just take a minute. I don't know that we'll be able to do it. And this is the hard part with hybrid. We've been exploring this at Lawyers Without Borders because it's global. We work all over the world. And you don't want to have like concentrations of power in one place and make the people feel that are online like they're not as part of it. So can everybody hear me on Zoom land?
Yes,
they can. Great. And I know we have Izzy DeSpirito and Medina Kasami from Lawyers Without Borders online. So I'm glad they've been able to join. But I thought maybe we could just quickly go around for at least the people here and maybe just let me know a little bit about yourself, maybe your name and just sort of where you work.
And so I'll talk for maybe 10 or 12 minutes. It's really meant to be interactive, so I can pause. I think once you get a bit of the feel for what we do, you guys very well may have questions. I thought we would then have Medina and Izzy talk about our work in Afghanistan, which probably many of you have been following on the news, but Medina's in close contact with folks on the ground, so we can talk a little bit about some of the challenges and what life under the Taliban is like. Medina is in the United States here, but her work is working in both places. And then I thought we would take the last 15 or so minutes and just have a discussion and maybe talk a little bit about the value of pro bono service, which is what I'm going to talk to a little bit within our organization. And this is our first road show. We had some interns come up with a name. It was initially the Pro Bono Roadshow and Rule of Law House Party. We are sponsored by about a dozen global law firms, and I got a very concerned message back by an attorney at a big global firm. She's like, but you're not meeting at someone's house at the time of COVID, and that might be disrespectful. They might feel uncomfortable because it's not a house. So we took the house party off of the show. So it's funny if you bring a bunch of lawyers into decision-making where you can end up, but we are a network of lawyers. We're a network of 10,000 lawyers across the globe. And I'll have Dave put up the slides and I'll walk you through. I just got finished with about 4 years seconded as a lawyer to the military. So without slides, I am absolutely naked. So you can do nothing in the military without a slide deck. So, but I thought I'd also make you some visual. I'm also not really used to talking seated. I think I'm going to try and stay seated for now. But if you get up and wander around, I just want people to be able to hear me. So we'll go to the first slide. So when I thought about how to talk to you about what we do, really at our core, I think we are lawyers and judges that solve problems. Doctors do cleft palate surgeries, they do heart procedures all over the world. You've probably heard of Doctors Without Borders, but lawyers come with their pens. They come, they don't fight battles with firearms, they do it with their voice, with their advocacy. And the other two pieces, I think, of our organization is that we take ideas and turn them into action. We are about creating solutions with governments that we work with overseas. I think the other piece of it that we always have to think of, and I think some of it is a uniquely American idea, in many instances to engage, to be dynamic, to move forward into problems. But you have to do no harm. You have to recognize, as I was told by a senior elder in a remote village of Kenya where I lived, which I'll talk to you about, when we were implementing plea agreements, the idea of resolving the hundreds of thousands of cases Kenya had that had no prioritization and really little infrastructure. And we have a problem with the problems, but no, I guess it's spelled right. But he said, you realize, Robin, if you implement these plea agreements and the community doesn't believe justice has been done, perhaps take a pedophile, they will pile him up in a pile of tires and set him on fire. And I was sort of taken aback. I had been charged by the Department of Justice and by the State Department to socialize this idea of plea agreements. And the look on your face was mine. I was in a remote village called Malindi, just south of Somalia. Beautiful area, most beautiful beaches on the face of the planet, a fairly modern place. But it taught me that the actions you take and your actions even here in your own community, that when you represent clients or you engage in business transactions, you're presiding over a matter in court, your actions do have consequences. And so we always try as an organization to ensure that we're working with the communities to have the intended consequences. So next slide. So what are the problems we're trying to solve? Capacity is low. Capacity is low everywhere. I lived in Europe the last 4 years. There's amazing lawyers and amazing justice systems, but just like in America, there are gaps. There are gaps at the highest levels of law firms and prosecution services and at the basic community level. So that is an area that we focus on. The rule of law. I have spent my entire career trying to really get my head around rule of law. I think most of us know when there is an absence of rule of law, when there is a shooting, when there is someone who doesn't have counsel, when there is a verdict in a case that people believe is entirely contrary to evidence. It is harder when things are working right to really define it. And so I often think about it in that context. There are a lot of underserved here in the United States. There are a lot of people underserved by lawyers in remote parts of the world. What's also interesting is being a lawyer in many parts of the world isn't really an esteemed profession. You might not be paid very much, and it might not be a career that you go down. Or in some parts of the world, it might require education you just can't afford. It may require you to be at the top of your class. If you can't, you're in need to maybe they're disadvantaged. And that all of our work should be done to promote human rights, the basic rights to ride, will be to in court, and also within civil society, the justice sector systems, which we'll talk about. So we have a mandate of neutrality. It doesn't mean we don't stand for anything. It means that we don't take sides. We don't engage in politics. And we have a degree of confidentiality and confidence in the countries where we work. So we may not agree with how events are unfolding in a particular government or election, but we generally do not get into those controversies. So next slide. So I thought I'd give you an example. Like, we talked about lawyers doing good, lawyers in action. And one of the really amazing projects that Lawyers Without Borders has done, we're not a new organization. I told you we're a consortium of lawyers from around the world, from big and small law firms, from universities, from the defense bar to prosecutors, to even people who aren't lawyers that are involved in public health. Our projects are generally aimed to be demand-driven. We get a lot of funding by the US government, this project by Department of State, and we established a training institute in East Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya. I had worked for 4 years for the Department of Justice. I was a federal prosecutor for almost a decade. And that was after I had met Tom and come here to defend depositions when I was at the law firm. And I didn't know that the government put lawyers overseas. We have probably within the Department of Justice about 100 lawyers around the world working on a variety of problems, from cybercrime to counterterrorism. And I was stationed in Nairobi to work on primarily terrorism and its finance, working on some aspects of terrorism for the country. But in that time, back in 2011, there was a real demand for more organized training. for lawyers and judges and prosecutors. The Judicial Training Center had been stood up in 2010, but there was really nothing for the rest of the community. And it was something that the department or the US government, despite the deep funding and resources we have, really didn't have the wherewithal to create this type of institute. And so we received funding through the Department of State. We developed a strategic plan to build a physical plant, which we'll talk a little bit about how that worked, just come up with the basic framework for how the training institute would operate, identify leadership and staff to actually work at the institute and develop the curriculum. So we have 18 staff that sit primarily in Washington, but we are truly global. So I would say only maybe about 50, 60% of our staff are in the Washington metro area. We are headquartered in New Haven, Connecticut. That's where our founder was from. And we have some of our staff there. And the rest of our staff are scattered all over the United States and the world. So we spend a lot of time on Zoom, staring at our squares. And some of us, we have interns that go through our programs that live overseas. We never meet in person, which is both really exciting that we can bring them on, but also a little bit of a challenge and disappointment. So next slide. So I had the opportunity to actually go to Kenya in June. I think kind of the magic sort of gap of COVID and travel is starting to resume. There's an 18-acre campus just outside of Nairobi, about 15 or 20 minutes. Anyone who wants to go on a safari, my old boss said I should have a small interest in a large safari company or vice versa, because I've set up a lot of safaris. And they're very accessible and they're fantastic. And one of the sad things is we do a lot of work on wildlife poaching and trafficking and working with civil society. And part of Kenya's vision for 2030, there's a strategic business plan, is that tourism will really be one of the primary sources of income for the country. And we used to joke, and it wasn't terribly funny, that there might not be any animals left in 2030. So the work that is being done to preserve them is obviously incredibly important. And Kenya values the wildlife and does a lot to preserve it. But as you can imagine, it's a trade, just like the drug trade or anything else, human trafficking, that has profits and can be really challenging. But in the middle, standing next to me, and is Director Haji. He has created a campus, and they are starting to use it for training. There is a moot court that is under construction. He was able to get about a $250,000 budget from the Kenyan government to finish up the building. And I hope when I go back out there in December next year to see the construction of the project. Projects like that in the US are not assured. How many of you know of a construction project that's gone bad? In Kenya, it can be even more complicated. But he's a real straight shooter, a leader. And there were 74 prosecutors. I was telling the judge when I met with her earlier, 74 in a country of 49 million people. Like, this country has no political will. They're not prosecuting cyber cases or anti-corruption or big, complicated fraud cases. And I said, well, look around the room. We have, a couple more dozen this. And like, there are more people in this room today than prosecutors in all of Kenya. They're working on murder cases, because those are the cases that the community are instructing them to handle, because those are the priority. So next slide. And you can just click all of those. We're going to jump because I want to get to Medina. So these are some of the next steps for the PTI, the Prosecutor Training Center. They are not generally, progress and our success is a constant journey. And so these organizations are constantly developing. They would like to have a legal writing curriculum. So I'm working with a professor at the University of the Pacific in Sacramento, and Professor Jacobs is working with us to start to launch and potentially develop curriculum and engagement for legal writing for both defense lawyers and prosecutors in Kenya. So that is an area where we will talk a little bit about our model. Next slide. So how do we do this all? How does an organization of 18 staff and 10,000 volunteers actually implement anything? Well, one, I have to tell you right from the start, we are not in a position where we can really take on volunteers. Even though we're not relatively new, we have very limited infrastructure. We have growing use of technology. Our programming and our ability to engage has been extremely successful during COVID. I can show you, we can talk a little bit about that too, it's great. But part of the reason I came to Omaha is to start to talk to lawyers who really deeply care about pro bono service, about their community, Every lawyer I've talked to so far has at least 2 activities and things that they're passionate about outside of the law in many instances. And so we are looking at how to make this more accessible to lawyers here in the US, or just to even start a dialogue. You watch the news, you see the events of Afghanistan, you'll hear from Medina. But we work with law firm partners around the globe. We have about 12 of the global law firms that both fund us and provide a substantial amount of our operating funding. We have community leaders, civil society that help us understand the needs on the ground. We have a professionalized board of directors, primarily of lawyers, but not all of them. Many of them are partners at law firms. We have the general counsel at Deloitte and the general counsel at Bain Capital that provide us with advice and counsel to keep the organization moving forward. And that's probably one of the things you often look, even we're fairly unprofessionalized in some of our processes, but we have access to this amazing group of lawyers that have tremendous skills. And every one of you in this room has the potential to identify and help us solve some of these problems. And we'll talk about that next. We work all over the world. Just a slide did give you sort of a geographic quick pinpoint. Next slide. We'll go through this very quickly. These are some of the areas as we look. There's a lot of discussion about access to justice here in Nebraska within your court system, sort of within the federal system. And so we work on a number of areas to promote more efficient operations within court, but also I'll show you one of our manuals to help people that don't have access to lawyers to represent them, to represent themselves. Probably the biggest takeaway is we do a lot of skills-based training for lawyers. We've done 800 to 900 judges and lawyers in East Africa trial advocacy. And we often embed that in the substance of human trafficking and wildlife in the combating crime to get people out of their seat to be able to make presentations and analyze evidence. Most lawyers in East Africa, South America get very formal, very little training outside of law school. And I don't know about a Creighton or Nebraska, but other than maybe mock trial or a little bit of report, it's not a very practical education where you're taught how to actually do your training, to learn that on the job. So unless you're working at a fast-paced trial practice, how many people here have actually been able to do a trial? So a fair amount, but so as lawyers, but I will tell you, in addition to the trial work, the writing, the understanding, the legislative drafting, the problem solving. And I'll give you one story. I worked with the Central Bank of Kenya. They were on the precipice of falling into what's called the blacklist, which would have meant they lost correspondent banking, which is generally the right to engage in remittances with the US system. It was a really dire situation for a country that's a financial hub. And they had descended in, they didn't have a terrorism law, a terrorism finance law, no money laundering law. They didn't have international assistance. I mean, they were really completely devoid of what they needed to operate. And they didn't have what was called the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is where all the reporting comes in from the banks on money laundering and crime. And Jackson Catilli, who was one of my close partners, I was relatively new at this job, was charged with setting up the Financial Intelligence Unit. It was one of the last steps to avoid this blacklist. And he was an African. He grew up in the hills, as kind of a warrior outside of Nairobi. And he had gone to Williams College, strangely, in the 70s. And I just could never really imagine Jackson traipsing around in the snow of very cold Williamstown. He called me one morning and he goes, "Robin, to go in to get this, I need an org chart." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "To get my budget before Parliament, they're asking me for an organizational chart for the FIU, for the Financial Intelligence Unit." That's like, okay, so what's the problem? He's like, "I don't know how to do an org chart. I don't know how to create it." And he's a 65-year-old African man who, for him to admit that I thought was a pretty humility, a lot of humility. Anyway, I said, "Well, I haven't done a lot of org charts either, but I do have Adobe and I can come down. I can bring a banker with me." I found a colleague in Nairobi that was willing to come. I said, "But I want you to stay with me till it's done. We're going to sit here, it's done. I'll go back to the embassy. I actually have electricity. She doesn't always have." And I finished it. And at 1 o'clock, I pressed send and I sent it back to him. I'm not sure he even read it, but he put it in his folder. He reproduced it. And he got his $500,000 US budget for this organization, this Financial Intelligence Unit, which could have just become a footnote if the Kenyans don't care, no political will. They don't have a seriousness about the rule of law or what it takes to engage globally. And sometimes it really is just the org chart. They need to solve a problem. So when you ask yourself, what do I have here today? You have an education and skills that you can generally see the problem. You can help people that are stymied, just like you help your clients and people that you work with. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Medina. These are some of the projects that you do that you could see that we do. We have a forensics program in East Africa to help law enforcement. We are doing some trafficking in persons work in Tanzania. And we just finished up a 3-year intensive trial advocacy program for East African advocates, judges, civil society. So skip through kind of quickly, Dave. We did a pro se litigants manual for women in Kenya. That was a joint project between Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher and one of our law schools that was part of one of our student division programs. Next slide. We create a lot of really cool material in the Department of Justice. I will say I was sort of straight-jacketed in sort of a very linear approach, and particularly our founder and our staff put together playing cards, graphic novels. All of our case files are developed specifically for where we work. Many of the countries don't have juries, so you don't do programs on juries. Go to the next slide. That is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Kenya when the new constitution came into place in 2011. Judges training judges, prosecutors, lawyers don't generally train judges. Judges mentor each other. He was hauled in by Parliament on his first week on the job as the new Supreme Court Justice, and he said, "I'm not coming. You're the legislative branch, I'm the judicial branch. We are independent under our new constitution, and you cannot compel me to come." He said, "Well, we'll send the military to come and compel you guys to do what you need to do," and they never. So he was off and running, and he really was a great leader. Judge Ann Williams from the 7th Circuit retired, and the Deputy Lady Chief Justice to the side in the purple is Judge Ann Williams, who still to this day does hundreds of engagements and has been to Kenya at least 18 times in the last couple of years, 10 years. Next slide. That's an example of pre-COVID, some of the work that we did. It's an old one when I was in Kenya, so I opted out, but that's our team. We bring small groups in country. Now we work by hybrid, and you can flip through, I think the next slide will. So I think our team has crushed it during COVID. We've spent an ungodly fortune in mastering how to use the technology. It's not perfect, but like today, we have people online. Love Latina. Couldn't travel here. It's fantastic. It speaks for itself. Nice. And so just some of our next projects, we're continuing to work with the Prosecution Training Center, the legal research that we spoke about. We're collaborating with the US Embassy on some counterterrorism projects, and we just started a trafficking in persons project to set up a unit that will help the Office of Public Prosecutions create a unit to deal with crimes against children. So setting up from start to finish. So I'm gonna let Medina talk, and then in the last bit, so Medina, can you hear me?
1 second here, I gotta.
Yes, I hear you, Robin.
Okay. So maybe I can just do it on this one. I was gonna. Medina?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, the sign's
Great.
better now. So, as lawyers, we can pivot towards problems. Afghanistan is a lawyer's problem. The judges and prosecutors in country are being fired. They're being blamed for the Taliban prosecutions. Doctors Without Borders can't do their surgeries or dispense medicine because of the degraded environment in country. So I'm going to turn it over to Medina. I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm really glad that you're here, and you and Izzy. I know maybe you could tell me, Medina, a little bit about how you got to Lawyers Without Borders and what you're doing.
Thank you, Robin. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am very delighted to have this opportunity to join you virtually this afternoon. My name is Medina Qasemi. I am the scholar in residence with the Lawyer Without Borders. I am co-leading the Afghanistan Rule of Law project with my colleagues Izzy Despirito, Georgetown Fellow. As a short introduction about myself, I am a human rights lawyer and a former diplomat. I have a bachelor's degree in law and political science from Kabul University and a master's degree in law and international legal studies with two specializations, international human rights law and gender in law from American University, Washington College of Law. As I said, I am co-leading the Afghanistan Rule of Law project, and I joined the Lawyer Without Borders to work with other lawyers for rule of law in Afghanistan and access to justice. I was born in Afghanistan, and I grew up in Afghanistan, and I witnessed all ups and downs for more than 40 years in Afghanistan. Yes, Robin?
Sure. And so tell me a little bit what's happening. I mean, obviously we can see on the news the many challenges, and many people were sort of seized by the events in August during the US withdrawal, but what's now happening in the aftermath?
Yeah, before I talk about what is happening in Afghanistan, by your permission, I would love to talk very briefly how was the situation of Afghanistan before August 15? I mean, before Taliban took over Afghanistan, how was the situation on that time? And then I will talk what is going on right now. In last 20 years, Afghanistan, with the support of international community, especially United States, have made great achievement, have made a great progress in rule of law. Afghanistan has, let me say had, because right now we don't have. Afghanistan had a constitution which is granted equal right of all Afghans, all citizens, regardless of their gender, regardless of their religion, regardless of their tribe. So, and men, all Afghan citizens, they freely enjoy their equal right. And women have been making a great achievement. Millions of women had the opportunity, millions of girls had the opportunity to go to school, and we had women in different leadership position. We had about 1,300 women judges, which was being a woman a judge, having a woman judge in Afghanistan was a taboo. But in last 20 years, we had 300 women judges. I said that, yes, I, a woman from a minority, had the opportunity to rise through the ring and become a senior diplomat and work here at the Embassy of Afghanistan in Washington, D.C. for 2 terms. It was a sign of progress. It was a sign of a good sign, a positive change. But unfortunately, it has gone, even myself, I can return to my country, and suddenly, unfortunately, everything reversed to the late 90s. I said that I have the experience of all ups and downs, which is going on in Afghanistan in the last 40 years. So unfortunately, the situation in Afghanistan since 2.5 months reversed to the late 1990s when Taliban was in power. Right now, we can see that girls over 6th grade do not have access to education. And Taliban are preventing women from entering to their workplaces. Taliban are also attacking on women who are voicing their concern in a peaceful protest and urging Taliban to respect women's rights. Taliban brutally torture Hazara minorities and force them to leave their houses. The report shows that hundreds of families were displaced from villages in Kandahar, Uruzgan, Daikondi, Balkh, and Panjshir provinces. Taliban continuously committing human rights violation, and dozens of human rights violation cases remain unreported because Taliban brutally tortures journalists who covered such cases, and there is no way to make a report of that cases. Taliban do not respect Afghanistan constitution. I just said that we had a constitution which granted equal right of men and women. But now Taliban do not respect the constitution. They just apply the decrees that their leaders issued. People all over the country, sadly, I hear a lot of bad news. I am in daily basis, I am in contact with people in Afghanistan, in different parts of Afghanistan. But they said that people all over the country do not have access to justice. And Taliban local leaders rendered the final sentences, like so-called in traditional way or field court, which is most of the time they re-victimize the victim. Taliban high official like prized suicide bombers. You may hear it, or like the week before, Taliban acting Minister of Interior meet the relative of suicide bombers and prized the suicide bombers and called them hero of the Islam or hero of the countries, heroes of the countries, which people of Afghanistan call them murderer of their children, murderer of their family members, because as a result of those suicide attacks, thousands of people, include international troop, national troop, civilian people, including children, women, like men, have been killed. But Taliban prized them. People of Afghanistan called for justice, and they blamed the Taliban action. The other sad reality is that Taliban action and their word is not the same, because Taliban leaders like announced a general amnesty, but their fighters go house to house searching for prominent Afghan men and women and brutally killing them, torturing them. So Taliban have not changed. And I confidently say they do not change. They just try to deceive international community to be recognized. And also, there is a lot of, like I receive a lot of report from the judges in Afghanistan that they receive a death threat because when Taliban took over Afghanistan, they released a prisoner from Kabul jail and also from the Bagram air base. Most of that prisoner are either ISIS fighters or Al-Qaeda fighters, and the Taliban's fighters, and they have been threatening the judges who were sentencing them. So Taliban are not capable to govern the country, and there is a considerable risk of humanitarian crisis and a threat of international terrorist group like ISIS returning. Just in a few weeks ago, as a result of ISIS suicide attack in Kunduz and Kandahar, 300 people were killed. Yesterday, they attacked on a hospital in Kabul, and a large number of people were injured and killed. Recently, Abdulhakim Haqqani appointed as a Chief Justice, which he was very close to the Mullah Omar, founder of the Taliban. As I said, that Taliban's word and actions are not the same. Taliban promised to the international community that they will have an inclusive government, but the cabinet members that they announced, they are only men. They are only the Taliban fighters, and they ignored the role of women in Afghanistan. Sadly, the social and economic situation of Afghanistan are very bad, and there is a very risk of a humanitarian crisis as well. And as the winter is close, and people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. Some of the family, I also spoke with one of the Afghan in Kabul. He told me this morning he told me that families are selling their children to survive the member of their families. He said that one family sold their 9-year-old daughter to a 55-year-old man. So, and also just last week, eight children died because of hunger. So there is a lot of sad news from Afghanistan, and the situation is getting worse and worse every day.
So I think that sort of sets the stage. And I mean, I think that's what makes this work really important and really compelling. I mean, I think the next question, and I don't come to you with answers, I come with more questions. But I guess I would say, well, we might not be responsible to solve the problem of Afghanistan. I think the US might have a little more difficulty saying that based on the role it's played there for the last 20 years. But we also, as lawyers, can't wash our hands or turn away from it either, right? So what do we do, Medina, as an international community, sort of moving, one step above community action, like where we're sitting now in Omaha, but what are some of the things that you think about in terms of engagement in light of where you see the country?
Thank you, Rabin. I think that the first thing is that people of Afghanistan are in extreme need of protection because they do not have the place to go to file the complaint and to ask for support. And so I want to say that the people extremely in need of protection, and there is no legitimate government to protect the civilian. And the people of Afghanistan are begging the international community to protect innocent Afghans and help Afghanistan not become a safe haven. ISIS are a big risk in Afghanistan, not only for Afghans. ISIS could be a big risk for the region, could be a big risk for the international community like United States as well. So in this way, I want to say that the international community can raise the voice of Afghan people and can call on the Taliban to be accountable, to stop human rights violation. I believe it is not a time to be silent or cautious and look to the people of Afghanistan, because Taliban have to and should respect their obligation under international human rights law. So I think international community support is very crucial to support people of Afghanistan.
I will add something from my personal experience, and some of it, having lived in Germany for the last 4 years, I was embedded in the military advising, but it really wasn't my experience with the military that affected me so profoundly. And I felt that Germany had a level of contrition for the Holocaust that was palpable. You could really see it, and most people were committed to never having that type of human rights genocide atrocity happen again. And even during Brexit, you could see a lot of Germans on edge based on the change of the geopolitical situation. What really struck me in the small town I lived in Stuttgart was that friends and neighbors watched as these things happened to friends and neighbors. And obviously you had concentration camps and detention camps and horrific acts that you can see in movies and in books, and all of those are documented. But to me, it was that I lived alongside you and I saw your kids and your parents taken away. And in some instances, community members turned other people in or indicated that they were affiliated with the synagogue or those sorts of things. And when I think of Afghanistan, I don't have the answers of what we can do, but certainly we can talk about it and we can discuss what is happening there. Everybody can do that. It's pretty easy to forget, a few months after the news coverage, right? What we also think at Lawyers Without Borders, it's the awareness. It's the voice that you give to the people that are there. About 140,000 will leave Afghanistan. 39 million will stay there. Maybe another 100,000 leave. There will still be about 39 million people there, and that won't change. They will not all be extradited or able to leave on any kind of visa. I get lists of spreadsheets of Afghans that work for the US military and the government as interpreters, as intelligence officers that are still there. It's much harder to go after and cause harm to people when they're visible, right? When they have some sort of connection to people that care about them or an organization. So that's one of the first steps that we're taking at Lawyers Without Borders, collect the information, the stories from the people on the ground to give them a voice, also to let them know that there's people thinking and caring about them. And that actually does matter. And two, as I said, it's much harder even for regimes like the Taliban to take action when there's some sunlight on the situation. I also think that there are concerns. You've started to read that people who are so desperate against the Taliban are turning to organizations like ISIS for protection. Many of these disputes, most of these disputes that I've seen, whether it be in Somalia with Al-Shabaab or in Indonesia over various political disputes, are over land. They're over rights and property rights. And so as you start to see people become desperate, affiliate with organizations like ISIS, you start to see potentially movement towards reestablishing land, rights to land like you saw in Iraq, leading to violence, terrorist attacks. I mean, so the stakes are also big here in the US, things we don't want to see that region backslide. And when people are hungry and they're willing to sell their children so they can either have the children get food, I mean, people are really desperate. So as I said, we are not here to solve it all ourselves, but we also don't have the ability to wash our hands, the responsibility. Are there some things you want to talk about what you're doing, Medina, and chime in, Izzy, on the line? Anything you want to share with the group? We have about 5 more minutes to kind of, if there's some things you're doing that you think you want to share. These are mostly lawyers and judges here that are very community minded and working at law jobs here. What are your thoughts?
I just want to share the work that Izzy and I working on that at the Lawyer Without Borders, because since 1st October that I joined the Lawyers Without Borders, Izzy and I have been taking several initiatives. Our target groups are Afghans who are inside Afghanistan, or Afghan refugees who are in the third countries or here in the United States. We creating research deliverables, which is done by our student division and pro bono law firm partners. This deliverable focus on key issues on the ground identified by the Afghan colleagues. We have been speaking with them. These deliverables will help individual and organization to contribute the rule of law in Afghanistan in different way, it can help them to filing complaints under international law. And the other project that we are working on that it is Know Your Right training, because the Afghan refugee who either based in the third countries, they know about what right they have and how they can go forward with their cases. And I would like to request my colleague Izzy to add more points about our work with Afghanistan Rule of Law Project. Thank you.
Sure, thanks Medina. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, good to have you.
Great. Could we go to the next slide possibly? Thank you. So as Medina said, we are guided by several project pillars. The first is, of course, our scholar in residence, Medina, talking to Afghans on the ground to advise us on what's going on and what we need to focus on. We have our research deliverables that are being taxed out to our student divisions and our pro bono law firm partners. And we're also engaging with our student divisions. We have over 35 across the world at different universities, and having panels and other events with them where Medina can speak to students and engage these young people on these important rule of law issues. We have a core group of legal professionals at Lawyers Without Borders dedicated to this project, And we are advised by an outside group of judges and lawyers who will contribute their expertise to our project. And finally, we've gotten dozens of inquiries from individuals, from organizations looking for help for these Afghan evacuees in both the US and in third-party countries, looking for either legal assistance or social assistance. So we've been looking to advise them. Next slide, please. So just a couple of initiatives we're currently working on. Medina mentioned that we are in direct contact with Afghans on the ground. We've done some translation work, thanks to Medina, for some of our project summaries so that Afghans on the ground can be engaged with our project because not all of them speak English. As Medina mentioned, we have these research deliverables that we really think will help aid individuals, Afghans looking to get back to work, and other organizations around the world to hold the Taliban accountable, whether it's appealing to international law and forcing the Taliban to comply with Afghanistan's obligations to human rights conventions. And as she also mentioned, coming soon, a Know Your Rights training manual project that we hope to create to aid refugees, both in the US and in third-party countries, as they're pretty uncertain of both their current legal situation and their future lives in these new countries. Next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we are still working with our student divisions. We've had one event so far a few weeks ago with our divisions at King's College London and the London School of Economics. It was a really productive conversation with Medina explaining what's been going on the ground. And a lot of students are interested in participating in our research deliverables project, which is great. We've also been seeking grant opportunities from universities and institutions to help cover our costs. And we do have a GoFundMe that is current. Next slide. So finally, we do have some future work we would love to engage in. It's kind of a slow process, but we are hoping to provide assistance to lawyers returning to work on the ground through advocacy trainings. It's something that Lawyers Without Borders is a professional at. We've done it in a lot of countries, so we hope to do the same in Afghanistan. We're also hoping to engage our student divisions over social media. We have spoken with several young Afghans who have taken to social media to raise awareness for these important issues, and we hope to contribute to that. And we also would love to provide technical support to nonprofits who are returning back on the ground in Afghanistan and in refugee camps with what we can do to assist. And we are still looking to link organizations and individuals to social and legal services in the US. Thank you so much for listening, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Isabella comes from Georgetown Law School. She is part of a fellowship relationship that Lawyers Without Borders has with the law school. Her previous fellow has stayed on for an extra year. She's from the People's Republic of China, and she stayed on an extra year to work with us, and then will either stay in the US or go back to China, what she chooses to do. So we are covering lots of parts of the world. I'll let you, if there's some questions you have, a couple of things as we think about work at Lawyers Without Borders. Work in Afghanistan really does have to be led by someone who knows Afghanistan, who's an Afghan, who believe in having global input and to be able to guide us on how to do it. What's interesting, just by the community of Omaha, there's probably an Afghan community. If you look, there must be a diaspora within just a very short distance. I know in Sacramento, where I am living due to COVID, largely our offices are in DC. One of the lawyers from Afghanistan that worked for the Department of Justice and Department of State on rule of law in Afghanistan lives 3 miles from my house. And so Farhad is running a grocery store because he's not licensed here. I really want to work with him to take the bar. But it can be really hard for people to get jobs here. You know what I mean? It's harder to come in with a license from Afghanistan. You can't often place into the bar exam. And I know one of the lawyers in Sacramento that did actually take the California bar and passed is very successfully employed as an immigration lawyer. So those are things I'd encourage you in your own community to try and figure out how to help young lawyers from whether it be Creighton or Nebraska, from schools here or from far afield to move forward in their education. And I will say, it doesn't take much money to do some of these engagements, but it does take some, and we appreciate the law firms and the folks that are helping us. I want to keep Medina on for at least 2 years and have her stay with us. But, one thing I couldn't do in the government, and the judge, we just couldn't make decisions to bring someone on in a very short period of time. So I went to the board when the opportunity, and I met and heard about Medina and what had happened to her, that she couldn't go back. I mean, she had not planned to stay here, and her job at the embassy had ended. I said, you know what, that's why I spent 20 years with the federal government, and I left a job I absolutely adored to join one that I might adore more. But those are the decisions we can make at a nonprofit. We can act a little bit more light of foot and bring people on. And as much as Medina says she learns from us by having a job and being able to work and learning the tools of the trade as a lawyer, she's never worked really as a lawyer here in the US. We learn 100 times more from her. So thank you, Medina. Are there any questions that people have? I know we're starting to smell the food. So,
I guess I have a question. Is there any work being done in Central America or Mexico that might be going on with issues with rule of law down there and everything?
So we have a program we are working with another global nonprofit, and it focuses on forced labor and child labor and looks at some supply chain issues. And that program is in Paraguay, Thailand. We actually have one of our lawyers just left for Paraguay on Tuesday. I guess I do it all. I do approve her travel over the weekend. And so we walked through all the COVID requirements of what it takes to actually go to Paraguay. It's not that easy to travel. But we are working with labor inspectors, justice sector officials, and others. And that potentially may start in Bolivia as well. We have had programs in Belize and throughout Central and South America. So a little bit of wildlife work in that probably. What else?
Don't be shy.
Let me ask, I bet, how many of you have heard about Doctors Without Borders before today? Every single hand, right? Were you surprised that there was a Lawyers Without Borders? Yeah, we're pretty well kept secret. So one of the reasons I came to Omaha is one, I really thought, as I thought about it in my heart, it would be a warm welcome. You know what I mean? I wanted to go somewhere that we could get some feedback on the work we do and talk to people I know, even if they don't have a lot of accessibility to this work, would deeply care about the issues, which is apparent before I came. But where do you think the role of being a global citizen, even if you can't travel to these places or even do some of the training, and do you think that there is a role for this in the communities across the US to engage overseas? I mean, do you see it as valuable to us here in the US? In what way? What do you think?
I would just say the more we're global, I mean, we all interact with each other. So the more human rights are protected, the more people are safe, the more the world is protected, it makes it a better place for everybody to live in. And I think Afghanistan is even an example of that. And that region is being stabilized, and it has, it impacts the world, what happens in one place. So I think the more rights are protected and laws are enforced and governments are good, whatever that means, but the better the world is.
I don't have much else to say after that. That's pretty much summed it up.
But it's the feeling there of the fact that we have withdrawn from that capability, sudden, abrupt, and shocking.
Can I put you on? Could you hear the question, Medina?
Could you please repeat it, because I could not hear correctly?
So, and I think I get asked this, and I'm gonna defer to you. I'm happy to take it, but how do the Afghan people feel about the U.S. withdrawal, and how do they sort of view the U.S. in light of the past 20 years and the recent events?
Thank you for repeating the question. As an Afghan woman, I want to say that all Afghan people deeply appreciate the support that international community, United States have been providing to us. But at the same time, we do not expect like such a speedy withdrawal. And we do not expect like the United States should stay for always as well. So there is two sides. One is that Afghan people do not expect that United States should stay for always in Afghanistan. But people wanted the withdrawal in a timely manner. Not so much, we think that it is very speedy. And this is something that caused a lot of like problem or challenges in Afghanistan. I had a panel discussion at American University, Washington College of Law in May, and I said that just raised my concern on the law scholar, with the law scholars, with the law professor, and I said that after U.S. through withdrawal, there might be a lot of human rights violation, and there might be regime collapse of regime. So we might have a lot of things. And one question was like, how long you want United States should stay in Afghanistan? My answer was that we do not expect the United States to stay for always, but we expect them to plan the withdrawal in schedule it with a condition based. So that's why I want to conclude it that we think that it's very speedy.
Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know we are right at the hour. I don't want to cut anybody off. I do have a couple of things that just keep my little microphone here.
I'm using this microphone now, so you don't even have to carry that around anymore.
I want to thank everybody on Zoom for being part of this, and I think it's amazing that we could create the technology to actually make it happen, and we were able to bring Medina in. I thought that the tech worked really seamlessly, so thank you. The Omaha, I mean, these events, obviously many group events, they don't come together immediately. We have not been gathering very often as a community in the last couple of years, so to find a location and to put it all together. I am deeply grateful to the Omaha Bar Association and to all of you. You are well led, and I have little Lawyers Without Borders mugs, and I hope you will drink your hot tea or coffee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I will say, I'm
Enjoyed
going
it.
to give it to one of the other lawyers, maybe from Jack, because I've already given Tom a mug, which he deserves more than a mug as well. But you guys can fight over. There's actually a box of them down at the bottom of the entryway. But what it really, lawyers have the ability to really affect change, and your education and your ability. And I've seen it where lawyers maybe don't have the type of advocacy skills or the writing skills that many of us had the opportunity to go and be taught by people that really are skilled, or judges that interest, or people in the community, or bar associations that make opportunities. So I really want to thank you for all you do here in the community. It sounds like, with few exceptions, you're incredibly involved and care about your community and welcoming to people who come. So I will, you can have the mug for symbolic, and you can leave this as. So thank you. Your firm has been exceedingly generous, and thank you very much. And Tom made it happen when I called him about 3 months ago. I think we actually started this more like 9 months ago, and COVID, of course, always seems to win. So I'm surprised that I'm actually here. So I want to thank all of you very much for coming. to this lovely location. I know we have some food and
Some drinks. Yep.
And I'm sorry, Medina and Izzy, that can't join us. People on Zoom land will try and take a lot of pictures. I've been asked to do that. Is there anything from Zoom or from Izzy or Medina that you want to say before we sign off? All right, hearing nothing. I'll let you.
We just want to say thank you so much for. I just want to say thank you so much for
Appreciate
everyone.
it very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, for those on Zoom, just send me an email and I'll get you signed up. If you haven't signed in here, please do that. I'll make this available by the end of the week for on-demand viewing, and I'll send it out to everybody who registered. So if you want to send it to somebody else, they can sign up and watch it. It's a free hour of CLE. And so we'd like to thank again Tom, Dalk, and QTech Rock for sponsoring this. And I know that we've supported the Law Day initiative here in Omaha for many, many decades, and that's rule of law in the United States. But this expands that to worldwide. Love the opportunity to learn about it. So thank you so much for coming to town. And that's it. Let's have some drinks and have some food. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Enjoy.